Barbara, you're able to take these things and narrow it down, and you did that by finding, I think, someone in the database who shared a great-great-grandfather with the Golden State Killer. When you're talking about building that kind of genealogy, because that's what takes so much time here, the DNA found at the house or on the glove, even if there is very little of it, would that be enough?
Yeah, even since the Golden State Killer, the techniques have become very sophisticated, and so it's possible to actually work with very, very tiny amounts of DNA. So that actually should not be a problem. It's more just a case of being able to build out the trees and there be the right people in the databases that we can actually see shared DNA with.
1:47 in the morning. A masked figure walks toward an elderly woman's home in the Catalina foothills of Arizona. Black clothing, 2 bags in his hands. Then suddenly, the camera cuts to black. No scream, no struggle caught on video. No witness ever comes forward. An 84-year-old woman vanishes into the Arizona night without a trace. But what investigators allegedly discovered afterward is what transformed this case from a missing person mystery into something far more disturbing. Because according to reports, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker may have recorded the entire thing. Not video, not audio, her body, every heartbeat.
When a person goes missing, those first 48 hours are critical when it comes to bringing them back alive. And now, more than 3 months after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, we're learning shocking details about who was and was not involved in the early hours of this investigation. In a new interview, FBI Director Kash Patel says his agency was sidelined.
Every spike of fear, every abnormal rhythm, time-stamped. And now, sources close to the investigation claim that data, combined with newly analyzed DNA evidence sent to Quantico, may finally be bringing investigators closer to the truth. The truth about what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning on February 1, 2026. And once you understand what investigators believe happened during those 41 minutes, you cannot unknow it, because this story gets darker the deeper you go. Investigators reportedly believe Nancy was awake when the masked figure approached her house. They believe her heart reacted instantly. They believe the physiological data may show prolonged fear.
What is next DNA-wise, Joseph Scott Morgan?
For me, Nancy, it shall ever be investigative genetic genealogy with this. And here's the thing. I don't want them to blister through the sample that they have. Whatever these samples are, they have to be conservative with them, because you can have samples that you acquire at scenes. You don't want to do anything that is going to waste the samples that you have. So the idea is you have to get enough of the DNA material to a lab that can do investigative genetic genealogy, where they can plug this in, create a family tree, hopefully through open source DNA, and create this profile where maybe you can find who this individual might be related to. And that's very powerful stuff here. You know, we've talked about phenotyping. We certainly talked about CODIS. And listen, CODIS is not a magic bullet, Nancy. Not every person in the U.S. is in the CODIS system. And, you know, the idea that this person would be, I think that they're thinking, and they have to entertain this thought from an investigative standpoint. This individual has had interaction with the system before that would compel the system to take their sample and put it in. That doesn't necessarily always happen. This might be this person's first time. And I got to tell you, looking at some of the things I've seen on these images, this guy's an amateur, all right? So it doesn't surprise me they didn't get a hit on CODIS.
And according to multiple reports, forensic analysts may now suspect she was moved from the property while still alive. But that is only the beginning. Because buried inside this investigation are mysterious DNA findings, alleged FBI conflicts, anonymous messages sent to TMZ, forensic genealogy, and one chilling possibility investigators refuse to publicly rule out: that this was never random, that someone may have planned every detail long before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And tonight, for the first time, we are going to reconstruct the entire timeline: the camera blackout, the cardiac data, the movement analysis, the DNA breakthrough, And the disturbing reason Sheriff Chris Nano says investigators are getting CLO. Sare. But before we get into the evidence, you need to understand something about Nancy herself. Because she was never supposed to become the center of a national mystery. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who spent decades living quietly in the same Tucson neighborhood. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy deeply investigated true crime stories built around real forensic evidence, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this case only gets more disturbing from here. Nancy Guthrie never lived the kind of life that attracts headlines. For decades, she lived quietly in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson, Arizona, a calm desert community of winding roads, cactus-covered hills, and expensive homes tucked into the shadows of the Santa Catalina Mountains. The kind of neighborhood where people leave porch lights on at night. The kind of neighborhood where violent crime feels far away. Neighbors described Nancy as independent, gentle, and deeply routine-driven. At 84 years old, she still maintained her own schedule, attended church regularly, and spent much of her time between family visits, gardening, and quiet evenings at home. Most people knew her simply as a kind older woman who had lived in the area for decades. But to millions of Americans, Nancy's last name was already familiar. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, longtime anchor of NBC's Today Show. And despite Savannah's public life, Nancy largely stayed out of the spotlight completely. She was private, family-focused, protective of her peace. After losing her husband suddenly in 1988, Nancy raised her children largely on her own. Friends say she became incredibly resilient after that loss. Careful with routines, careful with safety, careful with the people she trusted. Which is why investigators would later become deeply disturbed by the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Because according to those closest to her, nothing about that night made sense. Nancy was not the type of person to disappear voluntarily. She did not leave her medication behind. She did not ignore family calls. She did not suddenly vanish without explanation. And yet sometime after returning home on the night of January 31st, 2026, that is exactly what happened. Earlier that evening, Nancy had reportedly spent time with family. According to publicly discussed timelines, she had dinner with her daughter Annie Guthrie before eventually being driven home by Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. It was an ordinary night. No reported arguments. No visible signs of distress. No indication that anything unusual was about to happen. And that normalcy is what makes this case feel so unsettling. Because investigators now believe someone may already have been planning what would happen hours later. At approximately 9:50 p.m., Nancy was reportedly seen entering her home for the final time. The porch lights glowed against the desert darkness. The neighborhood was quiet. Nothing appeared wrong. But sometime after midnight, something changed. And investigators believe the first sign of it appeared outside Nancy Guthrie's front door at exactly 1:47 in the morning. A figure dressed in black stepped into frame. And within seconds, the camera went dark. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from and make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what's coming next will keep you on your toes. Most people hear the word pacemaker and think of a simple medical device. Something small, passive, a machine designed only to help regulate a heartbeat. But according to investigators and multiple forensic reports surrounding this case, the device inside Nancy Guthrie's chest may have become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Because modern implanted cardiac devices do far more than most people realize. They record, continuously, every heartbeat, every abnormal rhythm, every sudden spike in stress response, every dangerous cardiac irregularity, timestamped down to the second. And in many cases, those devices can also record movement data through internal accelerometers capable of detecting physical activity patterns. Which means, according to reports, Nancy's pacemaker may not have simply recorded whether her heart was beating that night. It may have recorded how her body responded during the exact moments investigators believe something terrifying was unfolding inside her home. That realization changed the direction of the investigation entirely. Because when FBI analysts and forensic specialists allegedly began comparing Nancy's cardiac data against the security camera timeline, they noticed something investigators could not ignore. At approximately 1:47 a.m., the exact same moment the masked figure appeared outside Nancy's home, the pacemaker reportedly logged a sudden and dramatic cardiac event. A sharp spike in heart rate. Abrupt. Immediate. Not gradual. not the pattern of someone casually waking up in the middle of the night. According to forensic interpretations discussed in reports surrounding the case, the cardiac pattern allegedly resembled an acute fear response, the kind associated with sudden psychological distress. And if that interpretation is accurate, Nancy may have been awake when the figure approached her home, aware, conscious, possibly terrified. Now pause for a moment and think about what that means. Because if investigators are correct, Nancy Guthrie's own body may have confirmed the exact moment something went wrong inside that house. No witness ever saw it happen. No audio recording captured it. But according to reports, her physiological data may have documented the beginning of the event in real time. And what happened next is where this case becomes even more disturbing. Because the heart rate spike reportedly did not settle back down. It continued, minute after minute. Investigators allegedly observed sustained elevated cardiac activity over an extended period of time, something forensic commentators say could indicate prolonged stress or fear. And then, roughly 15 to 20 minutes later, the movement patterns reportedly changed. According to reports discussing the device's accelerometer readings, analysts may have detected movement inconsistent with ordinary activity inside a home. Not pacing, not walking room to room, but sustained passive movement. Movement that some forensic commentators believe may indicate transportation. And if true, that would suggest Nancy Guthrie may have been moved from the property while still alive. No confirmed public evidence has proven exactly what happened during those missing 41 minutes. But according to investigators, those minutes remain the most critical window in the entire case. Because between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning, the camera was dark, the neighborhood was silent, and the only thing allegedly still recording was the device inside Nancy Guthrie's chest. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy deeply investigated true crime stories built around real forensic evidence, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this case only gets more disturbing from here. For investigators, the next question became unavoidable. If Nancy Guthrie was truly taken from her home that night, whoever did it may have come prepared. And according to reports surrounding the case, several details immediately suggested planning rather than panic. The figure seen approaching Nancy's home was reportedly dressed entirely in black, gloves, face covered, moving carefully through the property in the early morning darkness. Investigators later noted that the person appeared to be carrying two separate bags. That detail may seem small at first, but behavioral analysts often focus on details exactly like that because bags suggest preparation, tools, equipment, items brought to the scene intentionally. This did not reportedly look like someone wandering through a neighborhood randomly selecting a target. Whoever approached Nancy Guthrie's property at 1:47 in the morning may already have known exactly where they were going. And according to publicly discussed reports, the camera system itself may have been deliberately disabled within seconds of the figure appearing on screen. That matters enormously, because investigators now had to consider a chilling possibility. Was Nancy specifically targeted? The deeper authorities looked into the timeline, the more unsettling the sequence became. At approximately 1:46 and 58 seconds, motion was reportedly detected near the front entrance. At 1:47 and 2 seconds, the doorbell camera allegedly began recording. Roughly seconds later, the masked figure entered frame. Then came the reported cardiac spike from Nancy's pacemaker. And moments after that, the camera feed went black. When investigators allegedly overlaid the surveillance timeline with the physiological data, the synchronization reportedly caught immediate attention. Because if the reports are accurate, Nancy's body reacted at almost the exact same moment the figure appeared outside her home. And that synchronization changed the psychological profile of the entire case. This no longer looked like a random burglary interrupted unexpectedly. According to several criminal profilers discussing the case publicly, the sequence suggested something far more controlled, far more deliberate. Some analysts began pointing to what organized offenders often do before entering a target location: conceal identity, disable surveillance, limit exposure time, control the victim quickly, and leave minimal forensic evidence behind. And disturbingly, several of those indicators allegedly appeared here. But what truly intensified speculation around the case was what investigators did not find. No obvious signs of forced entry publicly confirmed. No massive struggle visible from the outside. No neighbors reporting screams. No emergency call placed from inside the home, which raised another difficult possibility investigators reportedly had to consider. Did Nancy know the person who came to her door? That question has quietly hovered over this investigation from the beginning, because crimes involving elderly victims inside quiet residential neighborhoods often fall into one of two categories: opportunistic intrusion or targeted access. And according to some analysts following the case, the level of apparent coordination seen that night seemed inconsistent with random chance, especially once DNA evidence reportedly entered the picture. Because while the public focused on the masked figure, investigators were allegedly focusing on something else entirely: biological evidence recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Evidence now sitting inside forensic laboratories at Quantico, Virginia. Evidence authorities believe could finally identify the person connected to what happened that night. And according to Sheriff Chris Nanos, investigators may be getting closer. As the investigation intensified, attention shifted away from the neighborhood itself and towards something much more powerful: the forensic evidence. Because behind the scenes, investigators reportedly began building what sources described as a highly detailed reconstruction of the final known hours before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And at the center of that reconstruction was DNA. According to multiple reports, forensic teams recovered several pieces of biological evidence from inside Nancy's home shortly after she vanished. Among them, a rootless hair sample and biological material reportedly discovered on bedding inside the residence. At first glance, that may not sound unusual, but investigators allegedly believed at least some of the evidence did not belong inside the home naturally, which meant the case may have moved from a missing person investigation into something potentially far more serious. The problem was that some of the evidence reportedly presented major forensic challenges. Rootless hair, for example, is notoriously difficult to analyze using traditional DNA extraction methods because it lacks the follicle tissue that normally contains the highest concentration of usable genetic material. For years, evidence like that often led nowhere. But modern forensic science has changed dramatically. And according to reports surrounding the case, authorities escalated the analysis quickly. The evidence was reportedly transferred to Quantico, Virginia, where advanced federal forensic resources became involved. At the same time, investigators allegedly partnered with specialists experienced in low-copy number DNA analysis and forensic genetic genealogy, the same emerging technologies that have solved cold cases once thought impossible to crack. That development marked a major turning point, because investigators were no longer relying only on witness statements, surveillance footage, or timelines. Now they were reportedly searching for a genetic identity. And according to sources discussing the case publicly, early database comparisons allegedly produced an unsettling result. No match, no criminal record, no known offender profile appearing in CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database. Which meant, if the reports are accurate, the person connected to the biological evidence may never have been arrested before. No violent criminal history, no prior felony record, no existing DNA profile already sitting inside law enforcement databases. And that realization immediately changed how investigators viewed the offender. Because statistically, random repeat offenders often leave forensic histories behind. But someone with no record? Someone capable of allegedly planning an operation like this while remaining completely absent from criminal databases? That suggests a very different type of individual. Someone organized, someone careful, possibly someone living what outwardly appears to be an entirely normal life. And as forensic analysts continued processing the evidence, another disturbing possibility reportedly emerged. What if the masked figure seen outside Nancy's home was not acting alone? Several criminal profilers publicly discussing the case began suggesting the individual caught on camera may have been operational support rather than the actual planner, the visible participant, the person exposed to risk, while someone else remained invisible in the background. That theory gained traction partly because of how coordinated the timeline allegedly appeared. The timing, the camera blackout, the movement window, and the possible physiological evidence suggesting sedation. According to some analysts, that level of control may indicate premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. And if that is true, then investigators may not simply be searching for a masked intruder. They may be searching for the person who designed the entire operation before it ever began. Meanwhile, public pressure around the case continued growing nationwide. Nancy Guthrie was no longer just a local missing person case in Arizona. The story had exploded across national media. And with every passing week, one question became harder to ignore. If investigators now had both physiological data and DNA evidence, How close were they really to solving this case? Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy deeply investigated true crime stories built around real forensic evidence, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this case only gets more disturbing from here. By the second month of the investigation, the case had already become one of the most heavily discussed true crime stories in the country. But behind the headlines and public speculation, something else was happening quietly. Pressure was building inside the investigation itself. Because according to multiple reports, tensions allegedly began surfacing between local authorities and federal investigators over how parts of the case were being handled. And in a case where every hour mattered, those tensions may have had consequences. The Pima County Sheriff's Department continued leading the public-facing investigation, while the FBI reportedly became deeply involved behind the scenes due to the complexity and national attention surrounding the case. At first, officials appeared publicly united. But as weeks passed, reports of disagreements allegedly started leaking into public view. Questions reportedly emerged over evidence handling, forensic timelines, communication delays, and the speed at which certain materials were transferred for federal analysis. One of the biggest points of controversy surrounded the DNA evidence itself. According to reports, some critics questioned why key forensic material was not immediately rushed directly to Quantico during the earliest stages of the investigation, especially considering the urgency of a potential abduction involving an 84-year-old woman. Those criticisms intensified after public discussions suggested advanced forensic analysis may have been delayed during the critical opening phase of the case. And once that debate entered public conversation, the investigation became even more complicated. Because now authorities were not only searching for Nancy Guthrie, they were also defending the way the case had been handled. Then came another development that added fuel to the growing speculation. FBI Director Kash Patel publicly addressed the case and used a word that immediately caught public attention: nefarious. It was a brief statement, but in investigations involving possible conspiracies or coordinated criminal activity, language matters. And many viewers interpreted that single word as a signal that federal investigators believed the circumstances surrounding Nancy's disappearance may involve more than a simple burglary gone wrong. At the same time, anonymous communications sent to media outlets created even more confusion. On April 6th, reports surfaced that TMZ had received two separate messages connected to the case. One allegedly claimed Nancy was dead. Another reportedly suggested she had been seen alive in Sonora, Mexico. The messages contradicted each other almost immediately, and according to retired FBI agents interviewed publicly, the notes appeared highly unreliable. But they still generated massive online speculation, because by that point, the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie had already evolved far beyond a normal missing person investigation. People were now debating whether she had been transported across state lines, whether multiple individuals were involved, whether the masked figure was hired, and whether someone close to Nancy's life may have known more than they initially appeared to. Investigators publicly avoided confirming most of those theories. But according to reports, authorities were quietly pursuing multiple investigative tracks simultaneously, including forensic genealogy, digital reconstruction, geographic movement analysis, and procurement tracing related to the alleged sedation theory discussed by some commentators. And as investigators allegedly narrowed those pathways, attention reportedly began focusing south of Tucson, toward isolated corridors stretching toward the Arizona border. Because according to reports surrounding the case, the final movement data connected to Nancy's pacemaker may have pointed investigators toward one specific search zone. A zone where federal teams allegedly began looking for something almost impossible to detect. A signal, still broadcasting quietly in the desert darkness. By this point, the investigation had entered territory few missing person cases ever reach. Federal forensic analysis, behavioral profiling, advanced DNA reconstruction. And now, according to reports surrounding the case, investigators were allegedly attempting something even more extraordinary. They were trying to locate Nancy Guthrie through the pacemaker still believed to be inside her body. Because while much of the public focused on surveillance footage and DNA evidence, investigators reportedly became increasingly interested in another possibility. What if Nancy's implanted device was still active? Modern pacemakers do not simply regulate heart rhythms. Many periodically emit low-power Bluetooth or telemetry signals when attempting to communicate with compatible monitoring equipment nearby. And according to reports discussing the investigation, Nancy's device allegedly still had years of remaining battery life at the time she disappeared. If true, that meant one chilling possibility had to be considered. The device may still be functioning. Some reports claimed federal teams explored whether specialized signal detection equipment could potentially identify the pacemaker's unique transmission signature within a limited geographic radius. And once investigators allegedly reconstructed the timeline between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning, they reportedly began narrowing possible travel distances from Nancy's home. If the movement patterns discussed by forensic commentators were accurate, then whoever transported Nancy may only have had a limited amount of time before the pacemaker's connection to the home monitoring unit was lost. That reportedly allowed investigators to estimate a possible search corridor extending outward from the Catalina foothills, particularly south of Tucson, toward remote desert terrain and highway routes leading toward Rio Rico and the Mexican border region. Now, it is important to emphasize that authorities have never publicly confirmed the full scope of these alleged search operations. But reports surrounding the case described federal teams allegedly deploying advanced detection tools capable of searching for low-range telemetry signals associated with implanted medical devices. And whether or not those reports fully reflect operational reality, they reveal something critical about how investigators were thinking. They did not initially believe Nancy Guthrie died inside her home. They believed movement occurred afterward. That distinction changes everything. Because if investigators suspected transportation, planning, and possible sedation, then the offender profile becomes significantly more organized and deliberate than early public assumptions suggested. At the same time, criminal profilers continued publicly discussing another disturbing possibility: that the masked individual seen outside Nancy's home may not have been the true architect of the crime. Dr. Ann Burgess, one of the most influential criminal profilers associated with FBI behavioral science history, along with other analysts discussing the case publicly, reportedly suggested the visible participant could represent only one layer of a larger operation: the exposed individual, the operational hand, not necessarily the planner. And that theory gained traction for one reason above all others: the level of coordination allegedly visible in the timeline. According to reports, the camera was neutralized quickly, the timeline appeared controlled, movement may have occurred rapidly, and little publicly confirmed forensic chaos remained at the scene. That does not resemble impulsive violence. It resembles preparation. And investigators allegedly began asking a question that would quietly shape the next phase of the case: who benefited from Nancy Guthrie disappearing? Because once investigators move beyond random offender theory, the investigation naturally shifts toward relationships, access, familiarity, routines, and trust. Who knew where Nancy lived? Who knew her schedule? Who understood the neighborhood well enough to move through it confidently at nearly 2 in the morning? And perhaps most importantly, who may have believed they could carry out an operation like this without immediately drawing suspicion? Those questions reportedly became central as DNA evidence continued processing through advanced forensic genealogy systems. Systems capable of identifying relatives, family connections, and hidden genetic links even when no direct criminal database match exists. Which meant investigators may no longer have been searching blindly. They may have already been narrowing toward a specific circle of people. And according to Sheriff Chris Nanos, they were getting closer. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy deeply investigated true crime stories built around real forensic evidence, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this case only gets more disturbing from here. Tonight, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. No arrest has been announced. No suspect has been publicly identified. And somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the television coverage, beyond the endless theories online, the truth still exists. Maybe inside a laboratory at Quantico. Maybe buried inside DNA evidence investigators have still not fully revealed publicly. Or maybe inside the small medical device still believed to be resting silently inside Nancy Guthrie's chest. Because if the reports surrounding this case are accurate, then that pacemaker may still contain the only uninterrupted timeline of what happened after 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. Every heartbeat, every spike, every moment of stress, every moment of silence, stored somewhere investigators still cannot physically reach. And that is what makes this case feel so haunting. Not just because an elderly woman vanished from her own home in the middle of the night, but because investigators may already possess fragments of the truth without yet having the final piece needed to connect everything together. A masked figure, a camera blackout, unidentified DNA, possible movement data, a mysterious 41-minute window, and according to reports, a physiological timeline that may suggest Nancy Guthrie was alive far longer than many initially assumed. Somewhere inside this investigation, there is an answer investigators appear closer to than ever before, because cases built around forensic evidence rarely stay buried forever. DNA evolves, technology improves, mistakes surface, people panic, and eventually, someone talks. But there is one possibility investigators almost never discuss publicly. What if the person responsible believes they already got away with it? What if they have spent the last several months watching coverage of this case unfold, believing the trail has gone cold? Because if that person exists, they may not realize how much the evidence may already be saying. And if the forensic genealogy works, if the DNA finally identifies the source, then the entire mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie could change overnight. A single name, a single connection, a single mistake. That is all it takes for unsolved cases to collapse. Until then, the desert remains silent. Nancy's home remains empty. And somewhere out there, investigators believe the final truth may still be waiting to be found. Waiting inside the only witness that never stopped recording. Now I want to hear from you. After everything we covered tonight, the masked figure, the pacemaker data, the DNA evidence, the alleged movement patterns, and the mysterious 41-minute gap, what do you think happened to Nancy Gutt? Right. Do you believe this was a carefully planned operation? Do you think more than one person was involved? Or do you think investigators may still be missing something critical? Drop your theory in the comments below. I read through them all, and some of the best insights in cases like this come from people paying close attention to details others overlook. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI. And if you want more deeply investigated true crime documentaries built around real forensic evidence, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay lose. Because when the next major development breaks in this case, we'll be here to cover it.